This is a CBS News special report. John Roberts reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York. Good day again to you. We are back on the air at this time because the verdict is about to be read in the Michael Jackson trial. The judge called all parties in the case to come to the courthouse in Santa Maria, California. And arriving in just a couple of minutes now will be the vehicles we believe are carrying Michael Jackson and his entourage. We have been, while you've been enjoying your local programming, watching some helicopter video of a convoy of black SUVs driving from the Neverland Ranch. Those are believed to contain Michael Jackson and his family and his associates. They're just on the outskirts now of Santa Maria and should be arriving at court in just a couple of minutes. Jackson, who has been staying at his Neverland Ranch, but apparently may have also spent part of the weekend at an outside location, is charged with molesting a 13-year-old boy back in either February or March of 2003. The indictment includes 4 counts of committing a lewd act upon the boy, 1 count of attempting such an act, 4 counts of giving alcohol to the boy to assist in the commission of lewd acts, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit child abduction, extortion, and false imprisonment. The self-styled King of Pop faces a maximum of 18 years in prison if convicted on all counts. He could serve as little as 3 years in prison because he is eligible to serve concurrent sentences if he were to be convicted on more than 1 count, and there's nothing to say that he will be convicted at this point. The verdict comes on the 7th day of jury deliberations at the courthouse in Santa Maria now. Our CBS News correspondent Vince Gonzalez and our CBS News legal analyst Andrew Cohen. Vince, you've been out there since the trial began way back on February 28th. What do you see as being the keys to this case?
Well, I think the key comes down to credibility. I think that's what everyone here agrees upon. It's the accuser's word against Michael Jackson's. Who does the jury believe ultimately? The accuser brought in his brother and sister, his mother. They all testified about the alleged conspiracy, the alleged acts of molestation. And when you strip away everything else in this case, it really comes down to he said, he said. Do you believe the accuser or do you believe Michael Jackson? And there were big problems on both sides with credibility. For the accuser, he was shown to have lied in previous court proceedings during depositions. The mother was shown to have lied in a previous lawsuit. She, at times, according to some observers, seemed delusional on the stand. She began saying things about the conspiracy that sounded very fantastic and unbelievable. The jury really didn't seem to like her. And Jackson's problem was that documentary in which he admitted he sleeps with children. He likes to share his bed with children. He insisted nothing sexual happened, but he admitted that was part of his lifestyle. So it really came down, I think, for this jury to who did they believe, because when you stripped away the conspiracy, which really did not seem to gain much ground, and you stripped away a lot of the other charges, that's what it's really about.
The picture that you're looking at right now is a police escort of those SUVs that we've been following while we have been off the air from the Neverland Ranch. Andrew Cohen, this young boy's credibility, 15 years old now, 13 years old at the time of the alleged offenses. Vince was saying that there were some credibility problems, but there was a moment in this trial, was there not, where his credibility seemed to be restored?
Sure, John. At the very end of the prosecution case, just before Memorial Day, prosecutors showed the jury a videotape of an interview performed by law enforcement officials of the young boy when he first came forward and made the allegations against Michael Jackson. Up to that point, the jury's perceptions of the young boy came from his testimony. It wasn't very good. But on this videotape, he was dramatic, he was emotional, he acted very much like a victim. And that was precisely the way prosecutors wanted him to be portrayed on the eve of the end of the case. That was a big point for prosecutors. The question is whether they were able to keep that momentum through closing arguments and through deliberations, and soon we'll know.
All right, so there you see the SUVs arriving just by your vantage point outside the courtroom there. You can see Michael Jackson's lead attorney Thomas Mesereau and his lead assistant Susan Yu. They're greeting the entourage, the door opening, and out coming, looks like members of Jackson's family. Looks like his mother and father. Joe Jackson there, greeting the defense team. Again, we don't know whether or not Michael is in this convoy because it was reported that he spent the weekend away from his Neverland Ranch but there he is. Yes, there's confirmation, obviously, that he is there. Coming out now under the trademark umbrella as he walks into the courtroom. And Andrew Cohen, let's briefly run over, if we could, in legal terms, the counts that Michael Jackson is facing and the potential jail time that he could face if he's convicted of one or more of those counts.
Well, sure. I mean, if he's convicted of all of them, he's looking at many years in prison. There's no doubt about it. In fact, John, if he's convicted of the molestation charge, any one of the 4, he probably won't be coming out of prison, out of courthouse the way he came in. He'll probably be going to jail right away. He won't leave the courthouse a free man. That's also going to be determined in the next little bit. And the thing to watch for, John, is the conspiracy charge. That's the first charge against Jackson. If we see a guilty verdict on that charge, it could be very bad news for Jackson. Prosecutors could run the table. They could get all of the charges as a conviction. The conspiracy charge was the weakest of the charges, and if the conspiracy charge is a conviction on that, it means the jury believed the alleged victim and his mother and didn't believe Jackson. So that's an early thing to watch for as we listen to the court clerk reading the roll. Obviously, if he's acquitted of that charge, it doesn't necessarily mean he'll be acquitted of all, but that is a very good bellwether, more than you usually have in a case like that.
Right, so if that domino drops, there's a good chance that it's going to fall into all the other dominoes, and they'll continue to fall. But Vince Gonzalez, you were saying just a moment ago that it didn't look like there was a whole lot of evidence for the conspiracy charge.
Well, the conspiracy charge seemed to be the prosecution's biggest problem. I mean, their case stumbled from the very beginning. They really tried hard to prove this conspiracy, but they were never able to put Jackson at the head of it, and even couldn't put him in among the alleged unindicted co-conspirators most of the time. There was a lot of testimony about what people did on Jackson's behalf, but very little testimony that he actually ordered anything or orchestrated anything. And you had this problem where the prosecution came into court, tried to prove a very complicated conspiracy and built it around these molestation charges, and then had trouble with witnesses who turned on them. Early on, we were saying the defense did a great job of turning prosecution witnesses into defense witnesses, and we thought that was a sure sign of how this case may go. But then once the defense started, they had their own problems, had witnesses who flipped on them, had witnesses that did not perform as they had hoped, and then they wrapped up their case earlier. The so-called red carpet defense we'd been promised went away, where all these stars were going to come in and testify on Michael Jackson's behalf about how he couldn't have orchestrated a conspiracy like this. So the conspiracy charge seemed to be the weakest card that the prosecution had, and it doesn't seem to have done very well during the course of the trial, but we really don't know what the jurors decided when they got in there. And I think Andrew's right that when the jurors come out, if they believe that conspiracy charge, if they believe the mother who said there were killers after her, who said that people were following her everywhere, if they believe that, then there's a good chance they believe the accuser on the molestation charge, and Jackson could go away for a long time.
Right, we just saw Michael Jackson's parents, Joe and Catherine, in there going through the metal detector and then getting swept with the hand mag just to make sure that they're not carrying anything into court that they're not supposed to. I'm sorry, it's been so long since I've seen them up front. I don't know if that's LaToya or Janet. Looks like Janet to me. Vince Gonzalez, if you would, who are the people who are going to be deciding Michael Jackson's fate here?
Well, it's interesting. You have probably the most famous man to ever go on trial, and his fate is being decided by 12 people who, until we arrived here in town, were unknown except to their friends and neighbors. You have engineer, a special education aide, a woman who trains horses, a young man who works in a grocery store, a young man who's in a wheelchair who wants to be a writer. These are the people who we watched day after day trying to gauge their reaction to the testimony, and I have to tell you, they were very closed-mouthed. They did not show us much reaction to a lot of the testimony. There are days where we thought we might be able to see something, but the key here is this is a conservative community. This is really not a jury of Michael Jackson's peers. This is not Hollywood. This is not Los Angeles. This is a very conservative part of a conservative county. And Michael Jackson's lifestyle here may have been the biggest stumbling block for the defense. They may just not have been able to get past the fact that people here would have a hard time getting over his admissions that he allowed children to share his bed. And according to his defense testimony, at some points, people who testified before him said they slept in his bed 365 days. That could be a big stumbling block for this jury.
Andrew Cohen, just a moment ago, we saw a very close-up picture of Michael Jackson as he was being checked at the security point there, and you've got to wonder what is going through his mind at this point.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for anyone in that position, you have to wonder. And of course, for Michael Jackson, the highs and the lows are so extreme here. I mean, he just leaves this palatial estate at Neverland that he essentially built up after he purchased it a few years ago, and you buy it and you make it into this haven for children, and then you're facing 12 people, 8 women and 4 men who are going to decide your fate and maybe put you in jail for 15 years in a case relating to children. I mean, the ironies here, you can go on and on about them. Michael Jackson has to be wondering, you know, how did I get myself into this situation? Remember, John, he was in trouble about 12 years ago. There was an allegation similar to this, and there was a payment made by Michael Jackson to keep that story away from the criminal courts. That came back in this case. You know, we've been talking about how lame the conspiracy charge was. I think prosecutors put it in this case not thinking that they would win on it, but because they wanted to get into evidence and before this jury other alleged acts of molestation by Michael Jackson, and they did. They were successful. Prosecutors convinced this judge, Rodney S. Melville, to allow in witnesses who basically had the same allegations to make against Michael Jackson, and they paraded in trying to corroborate what the alleged victim and his mother had said. And in large ways, that is the supporting evidence that prosecutors sorely needed. And again, we'll know in a few minutes whether it was enough or not. Certainly, the alleged victim and his mother alone would not have made this even a remotely strong case. Those other witnesses brought in made a big deal.
How long, Andrew, before you believe the verdict is read?
Well, it shouldn't be too long. Judge Melville is a stickler for timing. Obviously, he's going to be a little disappointed that things didn't start at the bottom of the hour, which is what he wanted. But it's not a very complicated process. Everyone's seated. The judge comes in. The jury is brought in. The jury hands for the clerk of the court the verdict. The judge looks at it, and then it is read. Once court starts, until the completion of the verdicts, it shouldn't be more than maybe 10 or 15 minutes.
All right. Vince Gonzalez, if Sneddon were to get a conviction on any of the counts here, this would really be the culmination of what seems to be an 11-year campaign to try to put Michael Jackson away for these alleged offenses.
Exactly. In fact, that's one point that the defense wanted to argue in this case, was that there was a prosecutor who had a vendetta against Michael Jackson. Andrew mentioned that case in 1993 that was settled. That was Sneddon back then as well, and he tried to bring a lot of the allegations from that case, even though it was settled, into this one. He was able to get in witnesses who said they saw the accuser from 93 being fondled by Jackson, but that accuser from 93 didn't come into the case. He did not testify, and we don't know why at this point. But Sneddon definitely made a point of trying to get in those old allegations, and at times it did seem like there were scores to settle. But the judge would not allow the defense to argue that to the jury, so the jury never heard about that. But even at his opening press conference, when these charges were first announced, Sneddon was criticized because he seemed gleeful about actually getting in front of the cameras and telling Michael Jackson, you have to show up, you have to now be booked, and we now get to take you to court and try you on these crimes. So there's definitely a sense here that these are two men who have been vying against each other for some time. Michael Jackson even put out a song once called DS, where he writes about a guy, I believe the name is Dom, I can't remember the last name, but when you hear it, it sounds like he's singing Tom Sneddon is a cold, cold man. So I think this goes both ways. Both of these men, one of them is going to walk out of court very happy, the other one very disappointed.
Right. Dom Sheldon is actually the name that he refers to in that song. The other lyrics go, they want to get my ASS, dead or alive. You know, he really tried to take me down by surprise. Dom Sheldon is a cold man, and it just keeps repeating that lyric again and again and again. So definitely there has been some animosity between Michael Jackson and Thomas Sneddon over the last 11 years. Let's bring in Trent Copeland. He's an attorney out in Los Angeles. He is a CBS News analyst. He knows both Tom Mesereau and Tom Sneddon. And, you know, Trent, there's always a level of combativeness in the courtroom, particularly in a sensitive case like this, where the reputation of such a well-known person is at stake here. But there was downright animosity between these two sides. You know both of them. What was the cause of all of that?
Well, look, John, I think as you indicated, look, both sides, this was a hotly contested campaign with both sides. Look, Tom Mesereau, one of the things that Tom Mesereau and Tom Sneddon have in common is that they were both former boxers in their college days. So these are two highly competitive individuals. There was a real dust-up in the courtroom at one point, John, when Tom Mesereau's group got a little too close to the prosecutors, and Tom Sneddon turned and looked at one of the bailiffs and said, get these guys away from here. We've got business to do. I mean, these guys really, share no love is lost between the two of them, and both of them were highly competitive. They were really going after each other, and I really think there was some personal animosity between these two attorneys, both of whom I think, John, did an extraordinary job in this courtroom, but both of whom as well were really out to get the other. And I think at times it really became very personal. And remember, John, in the close, in Thomas Mesereau's closing statement, he even mentioned in one of his first words that, look, this is a campaign. This is against me. This is Tom Sneddon Ron Zonin gave the closing statement, but Tom Mesereau indicated to him, he said, look, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you know, you've just heard an attack against me personally. And whenever you hear something like that, it suggests that the prosecutor's case is in trouble. So, you know, even to the end, you know, Thomas Mesereau was on the attack against the prosecutors, alleging that they were attacking not just his client personally, but also him personally. A highly competitive, highly combative trial.
So unlike most prosecutors and defense attorneys who may be opponents in the courtroom but respect each other outside of the courtroom and may even have lunch together on occasion, these are two guys you think who just genuinely don't like each other?
You know, look, it was a hotly contested case. And remember, you know, these charges, John, are incredibly graphic, sexually explicit. You know, it involves the molestation of a young child. Both guys feel very strongly about their cases, and I think they were very personally invested in it. I think, you know, aside from the fact that I don't think they're going to send each other Christmas cards, I think they legitimately don't like each other. And I think they don't like each other because they believe that one is after his client, and I think in the part of Tom Mesereau, and I think Tom Sneddon believes that Tom Mesereau is defending a man who's obviously guilty of a very, very serious criminal violation against a young child.
Getting some word from our folks inside the courtroom, Michael Jackson and his attorneys and his family, they only had a total of 6 seats there, have been seated. The prosecution is seated. The jury is not in yet. The judge is not in yet. Apparently, the atmosphere inside that courtroom now is absolutely silent, but that's going to change in a few minutes. 9 uniformed deputies to keep order inside the courtroom. Trent, just again, because you know these two fellows so well, there was some news out last week, I think it was last Wednesday, that Tom Sneddon had assembled his staff for a dinner at a local restaurant there called the Hitching Post. Anybody who's familiar with the film Sideways will know that there's another Hitching Post, the sister restaurant to that one up in the wine country of California. Was that a celebratory dinner as far as you know?
You know, I don't know, but I have heard in recent days that the prosecution's team has spent a lot of time at that restaurant. You know, look, they also would entertain witnesses before those witnesses took the witness stand. Remember, you know, Debbie Rowe was seen at that Hitching Post with the prosecutors before she testified in this case, John. So this is a real stomping ground for these prosecutors. Unclear as to whether or not, you know, Tom Sneddon was in fact having a celebratory dinner at that point, but it was clearly a place that was frequented by virtually everyone in this trial, including members of the defense team.
All right, Trent Copeland at our bureau in Los Angeles. Trent, thanks very much. We're just crossing the top of the hour here. It's 2 o'clock Pacific time, 5 o'clock on the East Coast. You are watching continuing CBS News special coverage of the verdict in the Michael Jackson trial. We got word about an hour and a half ago that the jury, after some 31 hours of deliberations over 7 days, had come to a decision. They had come to a verdict in the Michael Jackson case. The call went out from Judge Rodney Melville for everyone to assemble in the courtroom. Michael Jackson and his entourage and his family drove down from the Neverland Ranch, which is about 35 minutes outside of Santa Maria, California. And we're just waiting now for the judge and the jury to come into the courtroom, and we expect that we're going to be hearing the verdict read in just a few minutes' time. And we will point out to you that we will hear an audio feed of the verdict as it's being read out. You'll know that there have been no cameras allowed in the courtroom since the trial began on February the 28th, but today, for the purposes of public consumption, Judge Melville consented to allow an audio feed of that verdict as it's read. If you're just joining us now, let's take you back about 20 minutes or so to Michael Jackson's arrival outside the courtroom in Santa Maria. Here he is getting out of the black SUV underneath his trademark umbrella. Mickey Sherman is a criminal defense attorney who defended Michael Skakel here in New York, a very famous case. And he's with us in the studio. And Mickey, what do you make of the length of time that the jury took to come to a decision here? It's been said that the longer it takes, as long as there's not a hung jury, the worse it might bode for the defendant.
That used to be the case in the pre-OJ days. Since OJ, the system has changed, and no jury wants to be accused of selling anybody, either side, short. So they're going to take a lot of time. They just don't want to come out and be criticized by their peers, by us, by the world, that they just didn't give it enough thought. So in the post-OJ world, the jury in a complex case is going to take a considerable amount of time, and it doesn't bode well for either side.
There was a lot of testimony that they had to go over. There was a lot of evidence that they had to consider. And there was also almost 100 pages of jury instruction. Could that account for some of the time that they took as well?
Sure, and the foreperson is a very methodical person, we've been told, and they usually run the show, and they want to make sure that they cover every base. And jury instructions for a law student, for a lawyer, are difficult to understand, much less being so boring. So for them to digest this and to pay attention to it and then conform the facts to it, it takes a lot of time.
We're told that the jury is filing into the courtroom now. The judge can't be far behind, and then there will be the reading of the verdict shortly after that. Mickey Sherman, 98 pages of instructions from the judge to the jury. Is that unusual?
It is unusual. You know, it's probably not unusual for a complex civil case, some kind of antitrust action or something. But for a criminal case, he either did it or he didn't do it. I mean, you know, that's basically the way we operate. So to have such a complex jury questionnaire, jury deliberation form, it makes it very difficult, unless they have a very strong opinion one way or the other.
So why such a lengthy instruction to the jury?
Well, there's a lot of counts. They can go either way on each count, and the judge wants to make sure that they know the law on every particular count.
Is that because he doesn't want to get overturned on appeal?
Absolutely. The name of the game is to make sure that this is the only trial that's going to happen. The judge wants to usually bend over for the defense. And if I could add one other thing on what you're talking about, the contentiousness. Usually the relationship between the prosecutor and the defense lawyer is a lot more casual than people think. There's a lot of camaraderie. It's the exception when you have a situation like this where there's absolute hate. And the reason for it, I think, is that Tom Stettin, and I'm not trying to take one side or the other, but the facts speak for themselves. He went and got 100 search warrants against Michael Jackson. Now that shows a little bit more than casual interest in this person.
Oh yeah, he was definitely committed to try to get a conviction here. We should say that Judge Ronald Melville has entered the court. We're going to keep a very close ear here for the first indication that we're getting something from the audio feed from the courtroom. It'll be the voice of Lorna Fry, who's the Santa Barbara District County Court Clerk, who will be reading off the jury verdict here. Again, 10 counts, one count of conspiracy to commit child abduction, false imprisonment, and extortion. He could be acquitted of all of those. He could be convicted of any one of those. Then there's 4 counts of committing a lewd act upon a child, 1 count of attempting to commit a lewd act upon a child, and then 4 counts. The verdict has been handed to the judge, apparently, and 4 counts of administering an intoxicating agent, alcohol, to assist in the commission of that felony. We're going to sort of take the tone down here just a little bit in terms of volume, because the verdict has been handed to the judge, and we will shortly, we expect, hear the voice of Lorna Fry, the Santa Barbara District County Court Clerk, who's going to read the verdict. Again, this is a concession by Judge Melville after a strict gag order on all parties involved, and the disallowing of a television camera in a state court proceeding, which is highly unusual. He has consented to allow an audio feed coming from the courtroom. We're just watching the throngs of Michael Jackson fans who are out front. And by the way, we should point out that the local police department has dispatched a number of officers out there trained to watch for potential suicidal behavior on the part of some of these fans. There is a belief that if Michael Jackson were to be convicted on some of these counts, that some of his fans, being so distraught, might attempt to hurt themselves or may even attempt to commit suicide. So some of the officers that you see out there on the main street of Santa Maria, not just looking out for crowd control, but also looking out for signs that someone may attempt to injure themselves. Let's bring in Andrew Cohen now. Andrew, what's going on inside the courtroom at this moment, since the judge has already been handed the verdict?
Yeah, absolute silence, John. The judge is going to read the verdict to himself, and then he's going to pass it to the clerk, Lorna Fry, and she's going to read it. And it's not going to be very dramatic. She's going to read out the charges, guilty, not guilty. The verdict forms aren't terribly complicated. She'll go one by one. If there is some sort of problem with one of the verdicts, a hung jury on a count or two, which is still a possibility here, she'll let us know that as well. And then I imagine whatever the result, we'll get some sort of polling, especially if there's a conviction. The defense attorney, Thomas Mesro, will ask the jurors one by one to say that this is indeed their verdict, and then they'll do that. And then if there's a conviction, we talked about it, the whole issue of bail and whether bail gets revoked for Michael Jackson or not. If not, he gets essentially remanded right away and taken downstairs to the basement underneath the courtroom where the booking process begins.
And of course, if he is acquitted on all of the charges, which is absolutely possible, he'll walk out of court a free man. Though Trent Copeland, my expectation would be that even if he is acquitted on all of the charges, this is going to have a dramatic effect on his professional life and his ability to be marketable the way Michael Jackson needs to be marketable.
Well, yeah, that's right, John. And remember, it's been years since Michael Jackson was on the top of the music industry. So this is going to be a very difficult time for Michael Jackson, whether he's acquitted or not. I mean, this is going to be a very difficult process for him to rehabilitate his image, to rehabilitate his career. Because look, these are very serious charges, and at the end of the day, even if he is found not guilty, I mean, the fact of the matter is, in the court of public opinion, he's got a lot of damage control to do because he's acknowledged having spent a lot of time in bed with very young boys. So, this is going to be a very difficult sell for him, even if he's found not guilty.
Vince Gonzalez, we know that Michael Jackson has shown somewhat of a weak constitution at times, showing up in pajamas one day after he allegedly fell and hurt his back and had to stop by a hospital on his way in. That was the day that he was late, and the judge was threatening to revoke his, or not revoke his bail, but at least charge him the bail money, some $3 million. What was your sense of how he looked today?
He looked today about as well as we've seen him in the last few weeks, which is not good. He started out this trial striding in every morning, waving really energetically to the fans waiting outside. And as the months went on, he seemed to lose that. He began to get even paler. He began to shuffle into court. And then on that day, March 10th, when he was not able to get to court, he went to the hospital, and the judge did threaten to arrest him if he hadn't shown up on time. He shuffled in pajamas, and after that, he never really seemed to catch up. He began every day to come in just very quiet, very somber. In the beginning of this trial, when he sat in court, he was often talking to his attorneys, making notes. But now, for the most part, when we saw him in court, he just sat looking straight ahead, occasionally making eye contact with the witnesses, but he didn't seem to do well. And his biographer once told us that when things are stressful, Jackson seems to go into health crises. And in fact, right after that person told us that, he had to go to the hospital for the first time. He's been to the hospital at least 5 times that we know of during the course of this case, maybe more, and they've just kept that news from us. The first time was during jury deliberations when he got flu-like symptoms and missed court and caused court to shut down for a few days. And then there was that famous day where he went to the hospital instead of court, and when the judge threatened to have him arrested, showed up in pajamas. This seems to be a cycle for him. This judge simply set some ground rules very early that was not going to happen, that Michael Jackson was not going to slow proceedings with his health problems. He complained of a bad back. The judge said, bring in some pillows for your chair, but you will not miss these proceedings.
All right. Andrew Cohen mentioned this a little while ago, but it was a while ago, and I think it bears repeating, so let's bring Mickey Sherman in on this. Mickey, the way that the charges are going to be read out, count 1 of the 10-count indictment is that of conspiracy to commit child abduction, false imprisonment, and extortion. That will be a bellwether, will it not, for how the rest of this is going to go?
Exactly. I mean, that's the big one. And if in fact they find that, then everything else is going to go down the chute too.
So if he's found guilty of this conspiracy, that's the first shoe to drop, and then everything else along the line will go.
Absolutely. I mean, if he gets found not guilty of a few after that, it's not going to make a difference.
Right.
If he's found guilty of one of the top counts, he's going into jail.
And the flip side of that coin is, though, that if he is found not guilty of the conspiracy, that's not necessarily an indication that he will be found not guilty on the rest of the 9 counts.
No, they could just come to a compromise verdict and try and give him a break by giving him the alcohol charge, not contemplating molestation.
Right, right. So this has got to be a terribly difficult time for Michael Jackson. You have been there in the courtroom.
And his lawyer.
Yeah.
I know it's not about the lawyer, but I got to tell you, you are absolutely nauseous at this point. You're nauseous the moment the jury goes out to deliberate. As a prosecutor, you feel the same way. It's out of your control. You don't know what's going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it.
So what's going through your mind? You say you're nauseated. That's the physical feeling. What's going through your mind?
You're going back over the last 8 months or 2 years trying to figure out maybe you should have done this, maybe you should have done that, maybe you should have put him on the stand, maybe they shouldn't have done this. You don't know. And you're trying to second-guess yourself, and you're only making yourself more miserable and more nauseous. And the problem is it's going to be over like that. We're going to know the answer to this question very, very soon.
Trent Copeland at our bureau in Los Angeles. Michael Jackson did not take the stand in this case. Of course, the judge always issues instructions to the jury that should not prejudice them one way or the other. But they did actually hear from Michael Jackson himself, did they not?
They did, John, and they heard from him quite extensively. They heard from him in this Martin Bashir outtakes. The prosecution played the Martin Bashir video, which really gave rise to this entire action. That's the video where Michael Jackson was seen holding the young boy, acknowledging that he spends time in bed with the young boy, the young cancer survivor. But the defense, to its credit, played what are called the outtakes. And it really weren't outtakes, John. It really was Michael Jackson having a videographer really record the proceedings of Martin Bashir video as they were going on contemporaneously. And so to his benefit, they had the opportunity to bring in that unedited video of Michael Jackson sitting there being recorded by Martin Bashir. And you know, Michael Jackson talked extensively in that video about his philosophy on life, about whether or not sleeping with children was a good thing, how and why he slept with various children. They talked a lot about wanting to have a celebrity party for animals. Benji and Lassie and Bubbles the monkey. So there were a lot of things that came out of that video, many of which, John, frankly, were very odd in terms of Michael Jackson, his mannerisms, and the kinds of things that he believed in his philosophy in life.
Right.
But some of them, John.
Trent Copeland, I'm sorry, we have to interrupt you because we're beginning to hear a little bit of audio coming from the courtroom. Let's just put that up and see where we are.
State of California for the County of Santa Barbara, Santa Maria Division.
Lorna Fry.
The people of the State of California, plaintiff versus Michael Joe Jackson, defendant. Case number 1133603. Count 1, verdict. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of conspiracy as charged in Count 1 of the indictment, dated June 13th, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 2, verdict. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of a lewd act upon a minor child as charged in Count 2 of the indictment, dated June 13th, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 3, verdict. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of a lewd act upon a minor child as charged in Count 3 of the indictment, dated June 13th, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 4, verdict. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of lewd act upon a minor child as charged in Count 4 of the indictment, dated June 10th, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 5, verdict. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of a lewd act upon a minor child as charged in Count 5 of the indictment, dated June 10th, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 6, verdict. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of attempting to commit a lewd act upon a minor child as charged in Count 6 of the indictment, dated June 13th, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 7, verdict. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of administering an intoxicating agent to assist in the commission of a felony as charged in Count 7 of the indictment, dated June 13th, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 7, verdict, lesser offense. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of providing alcoholic beverages to persons under the age of 21, a lesser included offense of that charge in Count 7 of the indictment, dated June 13th, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 8, verdict. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of administering an intoxicating agent to assist in the commission of a felony as charged in Count 8 of the indictment, dated June 13, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 8, verdict, lesser offense. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of providing alcoholic beverages to persons under the age of 21, a lesser included offense that charged in Count 8 of the indictment, dated June 13, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 9, verdict. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of administering an intoxicating agent to assist in the commission of a felony as charged in Count 9 of the indictment, dated June 10, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 9, verdict, lesser offense. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of providing alcoholic beverages to persons under the age of 21, a lesser included offense of that charge in Count 9 of the indictment, dated June 10, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 10, verdict. We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of administering an intoxicating agent to assist in the commission of a felony as charged in count 10 of the indictment, dated June 10, 2005, foreperson number 80. Count 10 verdict, lesser offense. We, the jury in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of providing alcoholic beverages to persons under the age of 21, a lesser included offense of that charge in count 10 of the indictment, dated June 10, 2005, foreperson number 80.
Well, you can expect that Michael Jackson is just going to moonwalk out of the Santa Maria courthouse there, the Santa Barbara District County Courthouse. He had a clean sweep, not guilty on all counts, even the lesser counts of administering alcohol to a minor, which would have been a misdemeanor charge. Andrew Cohen and Vince Gonzalez, whichever one of you wants to go first, let's get your response to this. Michael Jackson's walking out of there on air this afternoon.
He has to be, John. I mean, this has been a grueling period for him. This is the best they could hope for. Jackson's dream apparently has come true. This says a lot about the people on the jury, that they showed a lot of guts. This is a very conservative community. There were a lot of people here who felt Jackson was guilty, would go by and boo the fans who were here, throw eggs at them, tear up their signs. These people have to live here long after Jackson is perhaps traveling the world on tour or has moved away. And the fact they were able to take this prosecution's case, all local prosecutors, and throw it out completely says a lot about their guts. And it also says a lot about the prosecution case, because the defense was the one that pointed out to jurors in closing arguments, this is about reasonable doubt and credibility. And if you don't believe these people, you must acquit Michael Jackson. And they seem to have taken the defense at their word and not believed the prosecution case that was put forward.
So Prosecutor Tom Sneddon, who has been after Michael Jackson for 11 years, tried to get him back in 1994 and couldn't, tried again in 2005 to get him and couldn't. He's handed a major defeat. Again, Michael Jackson acquitted on all 10 counts, including the lesser counts that he was facing of administering an intoxicating agent, basically giving alcohol to a minor under the age of 21. What kind of a defeat does this represent for the prosecution here, Andrew Cohen, and what possibly could come next here in terms of the legal process for Michael Jackson?
Sure, John, a couple of things. First, as Vince was saying, it ought to tell you something about how weak this case was by prosecutors that these jurors would so unanimously reject it. Thomas Sneddon is a local guy from Santa Barbara County. He was counting on these jurors from this conservative county to show Michael Jackson, we don't want you around. We don't like your lifestyle, and even if the facts aren't so great, we're going to send you away anyway, and this jury refused to do that. It's a personal slight to Thomas Sneddon, and it really does show you it was an awful case. It was one of the worst criminal cases I've ever seen from the prosecution standpoint. I've been writing about it in my column, and so I'm not afraid to say it now. And it really is a suggestion that Thomas Sneddon backed the wrong horse. He endorsed this family before he knew or should have known about their past, about the problems they had had with credibility under oath before. He backed them, he supported them, he endorsed them, and he tried to push through this case, and the jury today said no. Don't expect big talk from Thomas Mesro, the defense attorney, or Michael Jackson. They know that now they're going to face a civil lawsuit by this alleged victim and his family. They're not going to say anything that jeopardizes that. They're going to come out, they're going to thank everybody and so forth. We're not going to get any deals from them. The question that I will have is, what are people going to say to Thomas Sneddon, the prosecutor, and how is he going to answer? How does he answer for the fact that some of his star witnesses turned against him and ended up being better defense witnesses? How does he answer for Michael Jackson's ex-wife, Debbie Rowe, who he said would come to the stand and point an accusing finger at Michael Jackson, but who instead praised him? There are a lot of questions he now has to answer for putting the county through this sort of a trial with all that it entailed, only to have it be such a terrible result.
Andrew Cohen, as we've seen in past high-profile cases, a criminal conviction or criminal acquittal doesn't necessarily mean that the person is off the hook in terms of these civil charges. In the civil case that you were talking about, O.J. Simpson comes to mind, where he was found not guilty in the space of 90 minutes and then faced millions of dollars in judgments against him in the civil trial. What do you expect the family is going to go for here in a civil case against Michael Jackson?
Yeah, well, they're going to go for a ton of Michael Jackson's money, right? And there are a couple of things that are going to be different, John, about that case. A civil case, Jackson can't take the fifth. He'll have to testify. He'll have to testify probably in a closed deposition, the results of which I'm sure will leak out, and then he will have to testify in court. That's likely to generate the sort of settlement we saw before, only I imagine it won't be in the $20 million range. It'll be for a lot less. from the plaintiff now, from this family that becomes, instead of a prosecution complaining witness, now a plaintiff. They have to overcome this. And they have to overcome the perceptions that people have that this is a family that is capable of lying. And that is predator here, that is after Michael Jackson for money. One of the smart things, John, that Tom Mesereau, the defense attorney, did during his closing arguments was to tell jurors, hey, look, guys, you guys are the stalking horse for this family. This family wants a criminal conviction so that they can better easily get the civil money from Michael Jackson. Don't let them do it. And this jury said, no, we're not going to be a part of it. So their job, the job of this family, to get something out of Michael Jackson has seriously become a lot more difficult, and that's something that's going to unfold over the next 6 months, 12 months, even a couple of years.
As the motorcade there to take Michael Jackson back to the Neverland Ranch lines up, we're getting word from inside the courtroom that Michael Jackson was dabbing his eyes with Kleenex after the verdict was being read. You can imagine that that has to be an incredible relief for him. There he was, essentially in terms of his career, with the executioner standing over him with his axe raised, and then the jury said to the executioner, go home. We don't need you because we don't believe this case. But let's bring in Trent Copeland again at our Los Angeles bureau. And Trent, what kind of an effect, you know California quite well, you know how Michael Jackson is taken out there. What kind of an effect is this going to have on him personally and professionally?
Well, you know, again, John, I think it's going to be very significant. You know, it's very difficult. You know, in the best of scenarios, Michael Jackson, you know, really has not been on top of his game. He has not been on top of the music industry for a very long time. I mean, this is going to be very difficult for him. But I think, you know, if he reasonably expects to go out on tour with his brothers, as has been long rumored, I think he'll probably do fairly well out in Europe. Here in Los Angeles, California, here in California generally, I think Michael Jackson's still going to face the issue of why do you sleep with the young boys? Why do you openly acknowledge that you spend, as a middle-aged man, time with young boys? And, you know, so look, in terms of the court of public opinion, he's still going to have a very difficult time. But, you know, John, I want to say something with respect to what Andrew said a moment ago with respect to the civil lawsuit that may be on the horizon for Michael Jackson.
I was going to ask you about that. Knowing California laws as you do, you get a slam dunk acquittal like this. Is there much of a civil case left against you? You know,
I think what's different about this case from the O.J. Simpson case, where clearly he was found not guilty and there was a large civil settlement against him, of course, which was never collected. You know, what's different here is that, you know, this mother, the accuser's mother, went on the witness stand and she testified, you know, I don't want Michael Jackson's money and I'm never going to sue Michael Jackson. You know, her lawyer also, Larry Feldman, who also came into this courtroom, who also negotiated that $20 million settlement back in 1993, he came on the witness stand and said, this woman doesn't want any money. She's never asked for any money. She doesn't intend to file a lawsuit. Now, everyone who watched that and heard that testimony viewed it with some degree of suspicion, John, and the question will become whether or not this woman is going to stand by her word. I think that, you know, she may very likely file that civil lawsuit, but she also faces a great deal of scrutiny because, look, you know, she is under investigation as we speak for welfare fraud. She's under investigation as we speak for filing disability payments which she was not entitled to. So she really has a lot of baggage. And again, while she asserted her privilege against self-incrimination here in this civil suit, this criminal suit, in a civil suit, she'll be very hard-pressed not to testify if she wants her son to somehow collect some sort of civil money damage against Michael Jackson.
So she may not be exactly the sympathetic plaintiff that a person in a civil case would want to be.
That's exactly right. She's not a sympathetic plaintiff. Her son will not be a sympathetic plaintiff. Remember, you know, part of his attraction was that he was a young 13-year-old cancer survivor. Once this civil lawsuit goes into effect, you know, some years will pass throughout the discovery process, and he's going to be a much older young man and clearly won't be viewed with the same degree of sympathy once he takes a witness stand. So I'm not so certain that there will be a civil lawsuit in this case.
Mickey Sherman is here with us in New York. Just before we heard the verdict being read, Mickey, you were saying that as a defense attorney at this moment, and obviously as a defendant as well, you're nauseated just waiting to hear what's going to happen. The words that I heard emanating from your mouth as the verdict was being read were, wow.
Totally. I'm still saying wow. But you know, what's important to say is what this verdict does not say. This is not opening the floodgates for child molesters around the country. And that's going to be the spin we're going to hear from a lot of bleeding hearts. And not that child molestation is a good thing. It's a horrible thing. But this is not sending the word that you can do it and get away with it. This is one particular case. This is not the threshold case of child molestation. There is not many cases out there like this. The other thing that's important here is that this is not a predominantly African-American jury which let him go. And I think you got to think about that. This was a jury that really cared about what was going on and not about the color of anyone's skin.
Michael Jackson coming out of the courtroom now. You had to wonder if there was going to be a culture clash with this jury based on their makeup.
And the other thing is the greater distinction with the civil case, if they bring one, is the damages. In O.J., there's 2 dead bodies. Here, there's a child who may or may not have been touched.
Right. We should point out that the judge read a statement from the jury. The jury had a statement that it delivered to the judge after the verdict was read. The jury said, quote, "We thoroughly and meticulously studied the testimony, evidence, rules, and procedures since January 31st, 2005. Following the jury instructions, we confidently came to our verdict. It is our hope that the case is a testament to the belief in our justice system's integrity and the truth. We respectfully request the outside world allow us to return to our private lives as anonymously as we came," which means that the jury is going to try to resist all of the requests for interviews for the primetime shows, which will be coming up this evening, as well as the morning shows tomorrow. Don't know if they'll all escape that onslaught. The O.J. Simpson jurors did come out and talk. Michael Jackson there with there's Mesereau and shaking hands there. Muted celebration, I guess. Michael Jackson didn't jump up on top of the SUV and start dancing for his fans as he did.
Mesereau's going to do that.
Yeah, Mesereau may do that when he gets together with his colleagues tonight. But you remember Michael Jackson did that. I believe it was the first day that he appeared in court. Vince Gonzalez, let's go back to you out there since you're right there on the scene. Paint the scene for us there. What's going on?
Well, you know, we're pretty far from the courthouse, actually, in our position here. We're in the backside of it, but we can hear the horns, we can hear the fans. I think there's probably a lot of jubilation out there. I mean, there were a lot more people there today than there were perhaps in the last few months. There was always a diehard group of about 10 fans there. But now you're talking about a lot of people who came in from all over California, some from all over the world. There were quite a few people here from Europe, from Spain, from Denmark who we met, who came here for this day. They probably are very happy. There were many who sat through this entire trial who said they had to be here for Jackson. There were some fears yesterday and in last week that perhaps there might be fan violence if Jackson was convicted. Police said they confiscated stones and pine cones from the fans. Not much of a threat, but enough to cause a beefed up police presence. But obviously they're not expecting that now. There's probably just a lot of very happy people out there cheering their idol on as he gets to go home, which is what a lot of people thought might not happen.
As the motorcade is pulling out there with a police motorcycle escort, Vince, what is immediately next for Michael Jackson now that he's been acquitted?
Well, it's interesting. One thing we heard, there was a lot of speculation that he might leave the country after this, but we're told he promised his mother he would not take his children out of the country. We don't know if he's going to stay in this area, but he said he's not going to leave the country. And then, as Trent was saying, there have been reports that he's planning a triumphant world tour with his brothers, the first time they've gotten together to tour in quite some time. Our bet is, though, he's going to be going back to Neverland tonight to spend some time with his family, to relax, probably for the first time since 2003, when Neverland was first raided by sheriff's deputies here.
And certainly, even though this problem has been lifted off of Michael Jackson's shoulders, there are still a lot of other problems that he faces, and not the least of which is the shape of his finances. Trent Copeland, from what you know of Michael Jackson, can you enlighten us at all as to the state of his finances?
Well, you know, look, it's long been rumored, John, that he's really in debt. You know, that Beatles catalog that we've heard a lot about is largely what makes up his portfolio. And, you know, look, he has the ranch, but that is largely leveraged. He has that portfolio, that Beatles catalog that he is also leveraged against. He's taken out a lot of loans on that. So most people speculate that Michael Jackson is having quite a difficult time financially. I'm not certain whether Michael Jackson really will be able to, at the end of the day, take a deep breath and feel like all the weight of the world is off of his shoulders, because he's still facing mounting debt, mounting difficulties. Remember, the prosecutors in this case brought up the fact that it was his mounting debt and his financial situation that really caused this whole process to go into motion, that Martin Bashir video needing to be done because Michael Jackson was in such deep debt. So, you know, look, while he is relieved clearly, this criminal case is now behind him, he still faces an uncertain future relative to his very precarious financial position.
I would assume, too, that he faces a pretty enormous legal bill. I take it that Tom Mesereau, Harvard-trained attorney, doesn't come cheap.
No, he does not come cheap, and one of the things, clearly, John, about a criminal lawyer is they're typically paid in advance. So I doubt that he'll be facing any legal bills following this case. I think he was probably able to come up with the money to pay Tom Mesereau in advance, and Tom Mesereau now can walk away from this, presumably having been paid in full, and Michael Jackson does not necessarily have to worry about those fees, at least.
Andrew Cohen, Michael Jackson's wealth at one point reportedly between $350 and $400 million. Now he's reported to be anywhere between $20 and $30 million in debt. His earning power may have been greatly diminished. What's your take on the status of his financial situation?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, John. Whatever he paid Thomas Mesereau, he got his money's worth. Thomas Mesereau was masterful in court from the beginning to the end, from the opening statement to the closing argument to the way he talked to jurors. You know, one of the more compelling things that I remember now looking back on the trial is how intently the jury looked at Thomas Mesereau when he was delivering his summation, and how inattentively they looked at the prosecutor, Ron Zonin, who was the best of the prosecutors. That was telling to me. And Thomas Mesereau did what he needed to do. Look, he took a guy who, in his own words, on television, on network television, said that he liked sleeping in a bed with young boys. And he took a person perceived as weird and creepy, who made that admission in a child molestation case, and he was able to get the jury to not believe that Michael Jackson was willing to take it one step further. That's an extraordinary accomplishment, especially in this case, especially with this jury.
Mickey Sherman, let's pick up on something that Andrew Cohen just reminded us of, that Ron Zonin, the deputy district attorney, was the one who gave the closing arguments on behalf of the prosecution, not Tom Sneddon. I mean, typically, you're Tom Sneddon. You've been after this guy for 11 years. You'd make the closing arguments. What does it say about Sneddon that Zonin had to give the closing argument?
I think that was one of the smartest things that Sneddon did, in fact, because it took away that whole, obsession case, the whole vengefulness that they were trying to say he had, which I think he probably did have. And I think also that he probably wouldn't have been able to stay terribly dispassionate and focused if he had Michael Jackson on the stand. It would have been just too inviting. And the one thing about Tom Mesereau that I think, to bring up what Andrew said, is that he was able to, I think, put across something that Leslie Abramson did in the Menendez cases, and that is convince the jury and us that he, the lawyer, believed in his client. And that's not always the case. We were always accused of not believing in the client, just taking the money and doing the job. So when you can convey to a jury and the public and the media as well that you personally believe in it, that goes a long way.
We've got Randy Taraborelli wired up and ready to go. Randy Taraborelli is a CBS News analyst as well. He's an author of a Michael Jackson biography, The Magic and the Madness, and he was inside the courtroom. So now, because we didn't have a camera in the courtroom, Randy, you're going to give us our very first sort of inside look at what happened. Give us what it was like inside the courtroom.
You know, it was a moment, I got to tell you. I've been in that courtroom now every day for the last few months, and it was a very sobering experience. The jury walked in and did not look at Jackson, so those of us in the press corps were a little concerned about that because, you know, when they don't look at the defendant, you got to wonder what they're coming back with. Michael's mother was there, Joseph was there, his father, LaToya was there, Randy, Tito, the brothers. I understand Jermaine and Janet were upstairs waiting. It was intense, you know, I'm a little emotional about it because you just can't imagine the anxiety of everybody in that courtroom when those verdicts were being read, one by one, not guilty. Jackson was, I think, stunned. He looked absolutely just, you know, leveled by it. He was crying a little bit. His attorneys seemed a little bit dazed. Tom Sneddon and the prosecution just leaned back and looked as if their world had just crashed down around them. What a moment in that courtroom. I got to tell you, it was very intense. You
would think, Randy, that would be the type of reaction they would have if the counts were read off as guilty, not guilty.
You know, this has been such an ordeal, I think, for the Jackson family. They all look to me to be just absolutely exhausted. Michael Jackson, at a moment there, I actually was wondering if he understood what was going on around him. He seemed to be maybe medicated. You know, he's had back problems here. He's been on all kinds of medication. But when it really sank in, I think, was when he started to hug his counsel. At the end, before we left, they were hugging. The family was around him, and there was a lot of emotion at that point. I noticed Katherine Jackson was crying. even Joe Jackson was crying, and he hasn't really shed many tears during this time here in Santa Maria. So it was a very tense, a very emotional situation in the courtroom.
Yeah, of course, Joe Jackson, a man with a reputation as being a real tough guy, to see him breaking down obviously would be some sort of an indication as to the amount of emotion that was there in the courtroom. We talked with Trent Copeland about this a little while ago, Randy. Let's get your take on it. What do you think is the effect on Michael Jackson, both personally and professionally?
You know, I mean, that I guess remains to be seen at this point. You know, does Michael Jackson have the enthusiasm, the fire in his belly to continue his career, or has it been extinguished by this litigation? That really remains to be seen. I have to tell you, he doesn't look to me like a man who, is ready to go back out there and start singing and dancing. I think this has taken an extreme toll on him, and physically and emotionally. I know his brothers are anxious to go back out on the road with him and, perhaps make some money and recoup the money that's been lost as a result of this trial and the damage to his image that all of this has taken. But I have to tell you that my information is that Michael is planning to take some time to, get over what has occurred. I mean, he really basically perhaps thought that every night for the last few nights would have been his last night at Neverland, looking to the worst possible outcome. Now he's free. He walked out of here a free man. The fans went absolutely crazy in the front when the Jackson contingent pulled away. And I'm curious to see myself, as his biographer, where he's going to go from here. Right.
Let's take another look at the video of Michael Jackson coming out in front of the courtroom. And Randy, he went into this trial as an eccentric. People always knew that he had somewhat of an unusual lifestyle, and that, because of the plastic surgery and the way he conducted himself, he was not your average bird. But, after some of the coverage of this trial, I mean, a cover on the front of the New York Post when the case went to the jury that said "sweat freak." I mean, he's coming out of this trial not as an eccentric, but in the eyes of many people in America, as a complete freak.
I mean, let's face it, his image was, pretty well tarnished during this trial. I mean, the Peter Pan image that Michael Jackson had prior to this trial is no doubt gone, dead and gone at this point. We heard about liquor, we heard about pornography, children sleeping in his bed, though he maintained innocently. Everything that we heard, just served to slowly undermine all of what Michael Jackson has been doing to build an image since the time that he was about 8 years old. This is a man who was building an image for himself at the time that most kids were building tree houses. So this man has worked very hard to establish sort of this Peter Pan mystique. It's gone now, there's no doubt about it. What we will see now from Michael Jackson, hopefully, will be a more mature, more current image of himself, but that remains to be seen.
Let's talk about that image just for a second there. Peter Pan has been said to be one of Michael Jackson's favorite characters. Do you think in some way, I mean, you know him quite well, you wrote about him in your book, The Magic and the Madness. Does he want to be Peter Pan?
Michael has often said that he's Peter Pan in his heart. He is childlike in many ways, but it's been sort of a combination of what Michael has wanted for himself as well as an image that he's tried to project. But I think for us to really believe now that Michael really was Peter Pan, I think would be a little bit naive, considering some of the testimony at this trial. I mean, this is definitely a man who has, who has a lot of pornography at Neverland, who, drinks liquor. I mean, we've heard all of that. The jury did not hold it against him. I don't know about the court of public opinion, though. I'm not sure what his fans will get out of this. I think that he's definitely going to have to now reimagine himself as a pop star if he decides to continue with his career, which I have a feeling he will now. It's going to be interesting to see how he portrays himself. He can no longer, for instance, go on television and say that he feels as if he's Peter Pan in his heart. That's an image, I think, that he's going to now have to disavow completely.
Yeah, and I mean, I assume that he's going to have to completely stay away from the whole idea of children for the rest of his life.
Well, I can tell you that after the 1993 allegations against Michael, when he was accused of molestation, though it didn't become a criminal case, many of his advisors told him, you really have to stay away from children from this point on. Michael Jackson told me at that time when I interviewed him, after he settled those allegations for about $20 million, that he was determined to live his life his way. And he did. He went about the business of marrying twice. He had 3 children. And the next thing you know, a couple years ago, he's on television, holding hands with his young accuser. Though he maintained it was innocent, it really was what sparked all of this controversy and eventually this criminal case when he held hands with a young boy on a documentary a couple of years ago.
Right.
I got to tell you, I would be really surprised if we ever see Michael Jackson holding hands with any youngster on television again.
Yeah, I wonder if he could even have these Neverland play dates that he's famous for anymore.
You know, I think it'd be a good idea if he just abandoned all of that. I think that, you know, he really has to think in terms of public relations. I remember when he was married to Lisa Marie Presley, I remember Lisa Marie telling me that she was trying to instruct Michael on how to handle his PR because, as we heard in testimony in this trial, when it comes to public relations, Michael Jackson fails miserably. When it comes to music and entertainment, you know, he's a genius, but not public relations, going all the way back to the hyperbaric chamber, the oxygen chamber that he supposedly slept in the 1980s, through to the Elephant Man's bones, and all of the bad PR moves Michael Jackson's made over the years, culminating in that documentary of a couple of years ago. You know, I like to think that now Michael has a new lease on life, and he can go on from here and you know, perhaps think more strategically about his image and about his legacy, because, you know, a lot of people no longer think of Michael Jackson as the man who sold more records than any other artist in the history of this country, but they think of him in terms of these allegations in this criminal trial. It's going to take some time, I think, to get people to now reimagine Michael Jackson.
Well, I'll tell you, Randy, if he thought strategically, it'd be a real change from the way that he's conducted himself over these last few years. We talk about the idea that he's going to try to get back into the music business, maybe go back out on tour with the Jackson brothers. He's going to need the money because there are people out there who were speculating that the amount of debt that he's carrying, he may have to sell his 50% share in Sony Music Publishing, which of course is the old Beatles catalog, which brings in millions and millions of dollars for him every year. Just what is the state of his finances at this point?
Well, you know, we heard in testimony here in Santa Maria that his finances are in a shambles, and there's no doubt about it. There's no disputing that. Michael Jackson is well over $200 million in debt, you know, but he does have the Beatles catalog, which is estimated to be worth at least $1 billion, and he does have Neverland. But beyond that, he's got Michael Jackson. I mean, this is a man who can still go overseas and perform. He can still entertain. He can still bring in a lot of money as a performer and recording artist. And though his image in this country might be tainted, I can tell you that overseas, he's still a huge superstar. And who knows, here in America, he might be able to redeem himself as well if he takes a little bit of time off and allows us all to kind of come to terms with what happened in his life.
You could tell by the number of loyal fans who came from around the world to sit outside the Santa Barbara District County Courthouse there that he certainly does have a tremendous amount of appeal outside of the United States, Japan, Europe. He's huge. A tour there, he could probably do quite well. But back to this idea of him wanting to be Peter Pan in his heart, and this idea that he has behaved in a very naive fashion from time to time. The Martin Bashir documentary comes to mind. You know, Jackson trusted this guy. He thought that he was going to tell this glowing story about Michael Jackson, and the documentary, when it came out, portrayed him as being the next thing to a pedophile. I mean, how childlike can Michael Jackson be? He's been in the music business for almost 40 years.
Well, you know, one of the defense's strategies in this case was really to paint Michael Jackson, as sort of dumb. I mean, in opening statements we heard from Tom Mesereau that Michael Jackson is a man who walks around Neverland, you know, with his head in the sky, climbing trees, thinking about music, not doing anything in terms of business, not signing contracts, not being involved in any of the professional world. And the reason that he went down that road, Mesereau, was because he wanted to extricate Michael from the conspiracy charges and wanted to make Michael seem as if he was not involved in his business affairs. I can tell you, though, having interviewed Michael many times over the years and having also written about him and his business affairs, he's a very smart guy. And that's the dichotomy of Michael Jackson. It's the paradox. On one hand, you have the smart businessman who has made, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars in his life. I mean, he didn't become the king of pop by being stupid. On the other hand, you have this man who is extremely naive, who is extremely childlike, and who doesn't think in terms of what we in the real world would think of as common sense. And that is what has made Michael Jackson such a complexity and such a confounding personality for people for so many years.
Right. All right, let's give you just a little bit of a break there, Randy. You've been chatting with us now for about 15 minutes straight. Let's bring in Mickey Sherman. Mickey, what are your thoughts on this whole idea of the way that Michael Jackson has to comport himself from here on in?
For one thing, the fact that he's in debt is not that big a deal. He's better off in debt than in jail.
Oh, I mean, how many times was Donald Trump bankrupt, right?
Yeah, exactly, and he, especially the guys, Donald Trump didn't have the Beatles catalog or the ability to sing. although he does do pretty well in The Apprentice. But the bottom line, he's so far better off, so far ahead of the game, better than 20 minutes ago. The question I have, and Randy can answer this better than me, is can he change? Does this man have the ability to actually change his behavior? If he didn't do it after the $93 $20 million payout, is he going to be scared enough now? Or will the family hire a person to be with him 100% of the time? It's kind of pathetic, but that may be the answer for him.
Right.
I don't know that he's got the wherewithal to change his behavior.
Well, what do you think about that, Randy? Randy Taraborelli, are you still with us?
I'm still here, yes.
What do you think about what Mickey was saying, that, you know, does Michael Jackson have the ability, the sense of willpower to be able to change his behavior? Will he have to have a chaperone with him at all times if he is to protect what's left of his career?
You know, it's a good question, and obviously in 1993, you know, he had the opportunity to change his behavior, and he did not. But I have to tell you now, after sitting in this courtroom with Michael Jackson for the last 3 months every day, if this is not a wake-up call for him, I don't know what would be. This was devastating. I mean, his entire private life was laid out for the public. It was absolutely, there were moments in that courtroom when I was sitting in there with his mother when the pornography was on the screen, when I just thought this was the most mortifying experience of Michael's life. If this doesn't act as a wake-up call for Michael Jackson, I don't know what will. So I'm hoping, as I'm sure his family is and his supporters, that he takes this opportunity to now move forward with this life, a new man, and no longer allows himself to be involved in anything that could be interpreted as being inappropriate.
You see, as the Jackson caravan is going back to Neverland, cars, losing the signal a little bit there, cars pulling up beside him, fans waving their hands out the window, giving them the thumbs up sign. Andrew Cohen, the great thing about America, it's been said, is that everybody gets a second chance. Is Michael Jackson going to get a second chance after this?
Yeah, I think so, John. I think America does love that second act, and I don't think it's that complicated. I mean, part of the problem is Jackson. The man needs therapy if he isn't getting it already. This is a recurring problem. It's happened before. He needs to fix it. But mostly he needs to surround himself with people who can act and think like adults, like mature, responsible adults. One of the lessons I learned from sitting in on this trial is that universally Jackson makes bad personnel decisions. He picks the wrong people to help him, whether it's financial or personal, and that these people often have motives that do not coincide with his own, and either he's blind to it or he's so naive he thinks they're actually working for him. So he really needs, like a, you know, instead of a Damon Runyon figure, which we saw come through this trial over and over again, he needs like a Bill Gates type figure, IBM instead of Enron, to help him through this. And I think if he gets that, he has the talent. I think if he were to get together with his brothers, you know, just as someone who's listened to his music, who is part of that generation that grew up listening to the music, the talent is still there, presumably, after a long rest and some relaxation. He can do that second act, but it's not going to be worth anything if he can't keep away from children, if he can't manage his money better, and if he can't surround himself with people who are able and willing to say, no, Michael, I'm not beholden to you. I'm not, you know, you don't pay me, or, you know, I don't have to live on your salary. This is what you need to do. He hasn't had enough of those people in his life, and the testimony clearly showed that.
Yeah, I mean, for the last 40 years of his life, everybody who's around him, with the exception of his father in the early going, has been kissing up to him. I mean, who's going to have the chutzpah, if you will, to tell him this is what you've got to do, and if you don't do it, you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a trial about children, right? It was a child accuser. It was Jackson saying that his defense was that he was a child. Somebody needed to be an adult in Michael Jackson's life back then. Someone needs to be an adult in his life now. His brothers can't do it. His parents obviously didn't do a good job of it. Somebody has to come in. And I think when Jackson has made those choices in the past, they have invariably been the wrong choices. And I don't know who's going to help him do that. It's sort of like a chicken and the egg thing. You need a good advisor to help you get a good advisor. Quincy Jones, as Randy has said before, played a role like that in Michael Jackson's life. Maybe he can step forward now as someone Michael Jackson trusts, as someone who can communicate him on a musical level. But there's got to be someone who comes in and says, all right, the old way didn't work, Michael. The old way left you in debt within a verdict of being in prison for 15 or 20 years. If you want to have a second act at the age 46, and you can, here's the way you need to do it. I think the formula is there. It's the execution that's going to be the issue.
One might wonder if Tom Mesereau might not be wise to give up the practice of criminal law to be his manager, at least for a time.
No, he's too good. He's too good, John. That would be a tragedy for the legal profession, because other people are going to need Thomas Mesereau the way Michael Jackson did.
It might be good for Michael Jackson, though. Mesereau seems to be able to get him under control and say this is what you need to do. Let's bring in Trent Copeland again from our Los Angeles bureau. Trent, you know both the prosecutor and the defense attorney, Sneddon and Mesereau, very well. You're Mesereau, how are you feeling? If you're Sneddon, how are you feeling right now?
Well, you know, look, if I'm Tom Mesereau, I'm obviously riding high, John. And, you know, and I think you're right, actually. I think, you know, Tom Mesereau, you know, he got Michael Jackson under control. And that is clearly something that none of us who watched this trial believed, that as it extended over the course of 105 days, from opening statements till today's date, you know, that Michael Jackson could really hang in there. And, you know, Thomas Mesereau, he ran a tight ship with this defense team. I mean, there were certain members of the defense team when he felt like they weren't pulling their weight, like Brian Oxman, he had him out of the defense team. As recently as yesterday, it's rumored to be that Tom Mesereau even fired Michael Jackson's, or was instrumental in firing Michael Jackson's publicist, Ramon Bain. So, you know, he really has had a very steady, firm hand in this, and I'm not certain that he won't reemerge as a very central figure in Michael Jackson's life going forward. So, you know, look, I think he's got to be very, very buoyed, very happy with this. Clearly, he invested a lot of time in this. I doubt that he was able to receive his entire fee, given what Michael Jackson's finances are, but I think he's got to be very, very happy. If I'm Tom Sneddon, you know, look, Tom Sneddon is looking at retiring, the prosecutor in this case, John, in 16 months. He indicated publicly that, you know, really he was at the end of the road as a prosecutor. He's been the chief prosecutor there in Santa Barbara County for in excess of 20 years, a prosecutor for 35 years, and this is the end of the road for him. So, you know, he's used his political capital. I think now he's going to have to go back, face the residents of Santa Barbara County, and account to them for why he spent millions and millions of dollars on this case, why this case stretched so long, and why the result was what it was. So I think this is going to be a very difficult day for the prosecutor. I think it's going to be a very difficult day for that prosecution team.
Right. Mickey Sherman, what do you think the effect on the prosecutor is going to be? Is he going to be taken in Santa Barbara County as being Ahab and Michael Jackson being the white whale that beat him?
You know, it's amazing. These trials often decide who's the jerk and who's the hero. And it has nothing to do with what you did. It's the result that counts. If Mesereau won, he's a hero. If he had lost, he'd be a jerk. They'd be criticizing him for everything in the sun. And the same thing's going to hold true with Sneddon. Although with Sneddon, his baggage was higher.
Well, apparently Tom Sneddon is giving a news conference right now. Let's listen to him very quickly here before we get off the air.
All right, first of all, I want to begin by saying that I'm very proud of our office. I'm proud of all the people that worked on this case. Particularly proud of Gordon and Ron, the team we put together, and the Sheriff's Department, which did, I think, an outstanding job of investigating this case and assisting us in putting on the evidence before the jury here. So that's the first thing I want to say. I guess the second thing I want to say is obviously we're disappointed in the verdict, but we work every day in a system of justice. We believe in the system of justice. And I've been a prosecutor for 37 years, and 37 years I've never quarreled with a jury's verdict, and I'm not going to start today. So basically, that's all we really have to say. I'll answer a few questions, but I'm probably not going to remain too long. So if anybody has a question far away,
I think we're going to start over
see
here.
how it goes.
Can you hear me okay?
Certainly can.
Hi. Have you spoken with the accuser and his family, and if so, what was their mood and reaction to the verdict today?
No, as to all.
Can you address the defense's allegation throughout the trial that you rushed into this prosecution because of your past history with Mr. Jackson?
My past history of Mr. Jackson had absolutely, unequivocally, nothing to do with our evaluation of this particular case. That's been a nice little 30-second soundbite that the media has used to try to justify this thing, but it had never had anything to do with either the sheriff's investigation or our decision to file.
Can you address the fans' claim that the Santa Barbara DA was somehow trying to frame Michael Jackson, and all of this really is an elaborate scheme to frame Michael Jackson and make him look guilty?
I just answered that question.
Mr. Sneddon, in retrospect, do you think you had the wrong family on the stand?
I don't know how much work you do in the criminal justice system, but the system I worked in for 37 years is that people come in and they're the victims of crime. We don't select our victims, and we don't select the families they come from. What we do is we evaluate the case, We try to make a conscientious decision as to whether or not we have enough evidence to go forward. And that's what we did in this case. We've done it in every other case since I've been the district attorney in this county, and we will continue to do that as long as I'm district attorney of this county.
There you hear Tom Sneddon, the Santa Barbara County District Attorney, who was talking about his role in the trial. You're watching CBS News coverage of the Jackson verdict live on CBS television. We're back with our continuing live coverage of the Michael Jackson verdict. Just to keep you up to date here, he was found not guilty on all 10 counts. It was a clean sweep for Michael Jackson. There you see a helicopter picture of Jackson and his entourage in the convoy of black SUVs, which have become so familiar over these past few months, heading back up to the Neverland Ranch. Obviously, there's going to be some kind of a celebration there tonight because Michael Jackson now gets to begin the second act of his life. What's unclear is how he will play out that second act. There will be much more about the Michael Jackson story coming up on your local news on this CBS station and, of course, on tonight's CBS Evening News with Bob Schieffer, which is just ahead. Then in primetime tonight, a special edition of 48 Hours, Michael Jackson Walking Free at 8 o'clock, 7 Central here on CBS. I'm John Roberts, CBS News in New York. Good day.
For news 24 hours a day, log on to cbsnews.com.